I'm Martin Tugwell, I'm Chief Executive. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of Chair. I'm aware, I believe, that Councillor Haslam, you're prepared and able to stand. Can we have a proposer and a seconder?
Seconded.
All those in favour? Councillor Haslam, congratulations, you are now the Chair.
Thank you. I shall go. Thank you very much, committee. We've got the first thing we have to deal with is Vice Chair, please. And I have one nomination for Vice Chair, which is Councillor Eric, if anyone else would like.
Seconded.
Perfect, thank you. That's brilliant. I believe if I just ask my my technical help here, as in getting things right, we also need, do we need a minority chair now, or are we okay? Have we got enough vice chairs? We've got enough vice chairs. Okay, that's excellent. Welcome everybody. Today's meeting is it's going to be about 2 hours. We have 3 items that will be in open session and one that will be where we will have to be in closed session. I'm intending to spend about an hour on each, but we'll see how it goes. So hopefully you will be happy with that. I do want to remind you that this is being broadcast, so please just remember you're on telly, guys, and ladies. I will now just ask for any declarations of interest, please. Yes, sir, please.
I think I better mention it, Chair, that I am one of the Vice Chairs of the Public Transport Consortium, and it's unlikely, but there could be a potential clash, so I'm just making that declaration.
Thank you. And Councillor
It might arise. I'm a non-executive director of Warrington Zone Buses, a municipal bus company.
Excellent. Anything else? No. Please, yes. Let's do apologies. Thank you.
Okay, so we've had apologies from Councillor McLaren and Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Does anybody know of anybody else's apologies at all? Okay. All right, that's noted. So now I can move to the minutes of the previous meeting. I'd like. So the one matter arising from the minutes was a report on hydrogen, which I believe you all received now. But could I have a proposer for the minutes?
I can propose an amendment, Chair, because as I'm quoted, I ought to be in the attendance list.
Or you were there. Unless we recorded your declaration of interest as well, yes.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, I sent apologies. I can't see my name there. I could be missing it. I can't see it. I did send apologies.
Anything else to keep Gary on his toes?
With those amendments, can I move the minutes?
Thank you. Perfect, thank you. As I said, you've received a report on hydrogen. On our very first item is freight and logistics, and Rachel Ford would like to lead on this, please. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this paper is to update the Scrutiny Committee on some of our recent work around freight and logistics, and to share the outcome of a recent business roundtable that we held, which was chaired by Lord McLaughlin. So in June, we brought together a number of chief execs and senior leaders from freight operating companies and industry bodies to discuss how we enable more freight to transfer across onto rail. And in the paper, you can see that there's a number of themes that we identified, and the purpose of this was really looking at the target that we have in our strategic transport plan, which is to treble the share of rail freight by 2050. And we know that that's a challenging target, and it's actually beyond the national target as well. But we think it's really important in terms of boosting economic performance of the North, but also in terms of helping us to achieve some of our decarbonisation goals. Some of the themes that were identified in the roundtable were the importance of working to take a network-wide approach to infrastructure planning, including looking at things like strategic rail freight interchanges and where they're best located. It was also looked at about how we improve the cost competitiveness of rail freight compared to road freight. And also how we ensure that the correct balance is given to passenger services and freight services when we're looking at timetable planning in future. So there were some of the themes that were identified by industry partners and things that they would like us to consider in a future freight programme. What we've also identified in the paper at paragraph 4.5 and onwards is some of the work that Transport for the North has recently completed, which start to address some of these concerns. So the first piece is a piece that we called Understanding Freight and Logistics Guide, and we've produced a piece of work on consolidation centres, and that's attached at Appendix 1. And the purpose of this piece is to help public sector partners, transport planners and planners to think about some of the considerations that they should take into account when they're looking at consolidation centres and whether or not it's the right thing for their areas. So we've produced some guidance. In your pack, you've got the summary document of that, and we are making that available to our partners as well. The second piece of work which we have highlighted is at Appendix 2, and this is a fantastic piece of research that we've done through our Northern Transport Voices panel. Northern Transport Voices, just to clarify what that is, we have an online community of residents from across the north. It's a panel of around about 2,000 members. It's representative from across the north, and we use that panel to test different areas of research, but also to gain views on key issues. So we ran a piece of research with that panel recently, which was to look at how well members of the public understand rail freight services and the importance of that, and whether or not there is freight blindness impacting on the way that people perceive rail freight. So we completed that survey, and you can see the results of that, a summary of the results at Appendix 2. This piece of research has been incredibly well welcomed by industry and by other sort of government partners as well, and they're also looking at how they can look to use some of these results. So we've attached that at Appendix 2. In terms of the insights that we gathered from the roundtable, they're really important in terms of how we shape our future freight and logistics work programme, and we're working with our constituent authorities to help them understand how they can apply some of these insights as they develop their freight policies going forward. The second piece of the report at section 5 is just to highlight some of the work that we're doing with Northern Ports. And we held our first roundtable with Northern Ports in 2024. And we've been continuing to work with our constituent authorities and ports to start to produce some key understanding of what Northern Ports do, why they are important, and how we can maximise their economic benefit to the north. So, subject to the agreement of the board following endorsement by Scrutiny, we'll be working with our constituent authorities to develop a plan to take that work further forward. We've also included in the report a short section just in terms of next steps, because the freight related milestones in our business plan are of key importance, and we're really keen that we continue to drive them forward and that we look to build on them as we move into our business plan for 26-27. This report was presented to our Executive Board yesterday, and subject to any comments from Scrutiny Committee will be incorporated into the board report that we'll be publishing shortly. That is everything from me, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. A very comprehensive report. I did enjoy it, particularly the reference to freight blindness, which I think is certainly a big issue. So I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think on the consolidation issue, I mean, in the end, it comes down to commercial decisions by freight operators as much as anything. And I'm not going to try and find a particular reference, but key there seems to be what are the cost implications, because consolidation inevitably means transshipment, and that's a costly thing usually. So you can see why, you know, freight companies and businesses would just say, let's do what we've always done. What I'm not quite sure was what role the public sector might have in actually facilitating conversations that, if they were doing the jobs right, both freight logistics companies and the people dealing with the goods would be trying to sort out themselves. So I think that's the key thing. What's the public sector role in that commercial process, really?
Before you answer that, Rachel, I'll piggyback on that one. So I used to bring in about 3,000 containers from the Far East every year. The nightmare with the consolidated containers, because they took time to consolidate and also they took time to offload and get checked through things. I get exactly the point that Steve's making here, and it's how do we facilitate that sort of transshipment as well as the consolidation.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. I think that's a really good question because, as you've said, freight is predominantly a private sector operation. What we've tried to look at in the consolidation centres piece is how local authorities can play a potential role and whether or not consolidation centres are right for their area, because they aren't right for every area. So I think there's a few things that we have identified. So first of all, there is a role that local authorities can play in identifying supportive measures. So for example, could they subsidise a consolidation centre while it was in its set-up stage, or could it be for a fixed time while you assess the impact? So there's something around sort of, is there supportive measures that could be implemented? There's also some of the planning obligations that can be put in place. So through Section 106, is that something where you could encourage or drive the use of consolidation centres in new developments as well? There's also things that you could look around remedial measures. So considering the implementation of other schemes, whether or not that could be looking at whether or not HGVs are allowed into an area, whether or not there's security screening or delivery window restrictions around sort of when they're used. So the implementation of the consolidation centre could be encouraged as a remedial measure. So we've identified those within the report, and what we've said to our authority partners is we're happy to have a conversation with them about how some of that might be applied.
Thank you. Any more questions? Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just on a similar point there, because I had a very similar question originally to the one just asked. I suppose the follow-on then is, do we have any, there are a number of examples in the paper that you provided of schemes that have been trialled or, have been and gone in the UK. Do we have any international examples that we can draw upon? Because it strikes me that in every case that we've had presented to us, it's all about the level of public subsidy that's being provided, and when the public subsidy isn't there, then the thing stops. And so I'm just curious, how do we get past that that barrier, I guess? Or is it always going to be a case of public subsidy? Is there anything we can learn from international examples?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. We didn't look at any international examples in this piece of research. It is something that I can take away and discuss with the freight team whether or not it's possible to do so. I think in terms of the subsidy issue, is it always there? There's some examples in there where actually it has worked without subsidy, but I think what you can see from the examples is it's probably something which is needed to help get it up and running in the first place. And it's in terms of how we can look to different ways. So I will take that question away and we'll have a chat with the freight team and get back to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Joe. Yes, yes, I was going to ask about consolidation. My first job many years ago was a junior clerk at a goods station, and where transshipment took place, which was quite chaotic and stuff got lost at the back of the queue. And more recently, it was called transit stations, but we seem to be moving on now to consolidation centres. The problem is, if people order something now, and a lot of people order online, they want it within hours. But I say that's something to be looked at. Now, one of the questions, how can we reduce charges? There's a very easy answer to reducing charges. Just ask Great British Rail to reduce the access charges so that we can be competitive with road. Simple answer. Whether they'll say yes, probably doubtful. I do have other concerns on this report as well, so I hope you'll bear with me, Chair. But speaking now as a retired company control manager for a rail freight company. So we're talking about moving more traffic from northern ports. Well, if you do that, you have to have gauging that'll take at least 8'6" containers, preferably a much higher gauge, but I don't think there's any of that on the railway at the moment. So what's basically happening there with the container traffic? A few meetings ago, when there was a lady here talking about Freightliners, I asked, was the Trafford Park Newcastle Freightliner still running? And said she'd come back to me and tell me. Now, I'd be interested to know if it is running, because it has to run via the Stanage Tunnel, and at the moment Huddersfield's closed. So the question, if it's still running, and if so, could it be going back to many years ago? Because originally that used to run via the Woodhead Tunnel, but when they closed the Woodhead Tunnel, for quite some time it had to go via Walsall, going south to go north. So again, it's going back to gauging, and also heavy axle weights have to be considered as well, depending on. So this is something that hopefully that can be taken into account. Now, will increasing share of freight by rail, brilliant, everyone agrees with it, or most people, but capacity, and that is the problem, which I noticed this morning coming from Manchester to Leeds, with Huddersfield closed, capacity is very tight, and for a while I think we were running behind a Class 2 service, but we arrived over 20 minutes late anyway. I know that there were other faults as well. So there's some wonderful ideas. We all want to move more freight by rail. You've got to have capacity, you've got to have the gauging, you've got to have you've got to have rail capable of taking heavy axle weights, because I know from my previous experience there were occasions when heavy axle weights were limited on routes, which I know I've been retired a while now, but I'm not sure how much updating has gone on in recent years. And I think there was one other question. What was it now? Oh yes, one question I asked a few meetings ago. We've been promised there's going to be 4-track from Huddersfield, I think it's to Thornhill Junction near Dewsbury, sorry. But there's only 2-track between Dewsbury and Leeds, which includes the 3-mile Morley Tunnel. But there's going to be increased services because of this 4-track. So my question is, how is the increased service going to go between Dewsbury and Leeds, or are some of the extra services going to go via Wakefield and Castleford and Church Fenton, that route? So sorry if I've gone on a bit, but I think this is very, very important, and we do want to get it right. Thank you, Chair. I'll shut up.
Are you going to take that one, Rachel?
If I could just start off, thank you, Councillor Fletcher, and then I'll hand over to Katie, who'll touch on some of the more detailed real items there. In terms of recognising that this is something that we need to get right, that's something that we're really clear on, and there's a lot of work going on between my team and the strategic rail team to look at what interventions we need to put in place to make sure that we can deliver this target, because you're right, we do need increased gauge clearance, we do need to be able to take sort of increased axle weights to be able to deliver this target. So what we're looking at is what interventions we need to deliver across the north to make sure that we can do this. And there's improvements that are happening as part of the Trans-Pennine route upgrade that are going to help with some of this, but also what else might we need beyond that. So the issues that you've identified do still exist. We need to work collaboratively to put a plan in place as to how we address them and how we ensure that we get the investment into the north, working with the public sector partners, but also with the private sector partners to make the case for that.
Just specifically, Councillor, on the questions of Trans-Pennine route upgrade and the 2-track, I'll take that away because we deal with Trans-Pennine route upgrade all the time and find the details out for you and get the team to come back to you. And if you want to, I didn't catch the full details of the specific service you were mentioning about using Huddersfield again. Perhaps I'll speak to you offline and we can find out what's going on. I think I would just remind members it's a 30-day closure. This isn't indefinite, and actually, blockades are an important part of actually being able to improve the infrastructure we've got, which allows us to run more services, and is actually a fundamental part something the work that Transport for the North has done with the Rail North Committee was arguing about getting that gauge clearance and the freight trains that we wanted to see are using that Trans-Pennine route for exactly that reason. And gauge clearance is as Rachel has said, part of the investment package that we would expect to bring forward for consideration.
Can I come back with you a second, Chair?
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, because I say I've been retired a long time now, but there were 4 tunnels on the Hebden Bridge route that required clearance for 8-foot-6 containers. I just wondered, have they been cleared yet? Because otherwise there isn't a diversion route. And sorry, one other question, if you'll bear with me, Chair, was there's talk at a recent board meeting about closing Trafford Park and moving to the Warrington Merseyside area, and apologies to Steve, but my question is, there's only twin track north of Winsford. So if you're going to move all the freight line, so you'll have Garston, the full load depot at Widnes, a new Freightliner terminal, I think it's on the Warrington Merseyside border, will there be capacity for that? And the other concern I have is businesses in Greater Manchester, especially on the east side, why they're going to have a long way to go by road. But when I spoke to the Deputy Leader of Cheshire East Council who went to the board meeting, I did ask him to ask, could we be looking at Guide Bridge as an alternative for Trafford Park, which would be a much easier access, and also, of course, there'd be easier access by rail, because at Heaton Norwich Junction you just turn right for Guide Bridge and you wouldn't be putting capacity on the West Coast Main Line north of Crewe. I think the Deputy Leader did put that forward, but I don't know what happened to that. Thank you, Chair.
I think at this stage, Councillor, I can just note your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Parish, then Councillor Perry,
Sorry,
and
Steve.
Councillor Firth. That's just so that you know that I've noticed that you've been waving at me.
I was just trying. Sorry. Rather, I was just trying to get back to the consolidation issue, because of course Freightliners are probably one of the best examples of consolidation we've got, because it's an alternative to 40 lorries between Liverpool and Felixstowe and this sort of thing. As far as I know, all the Trafford Park services, both companies, are to the southern ports, because that's where the business largely is.
It used to be Newcastle,
It's
but
long, but yeah. But and it was just reiterating the point, really, looking at the case studies, and you think for an airport you can see that, because you don't want. I mean, you can't have lots of vehicles running around airports, but even especially airside. But so you can see that. But the Regent Street one, I'd be interested in knowing. It actually says 2007 to 2024, which I'm hoping means it is still going, although others say to the present. So I'll be interested to know whether it is still going. But you think, just logically, one centre at one side of the city. You've got a lot of vehicles going a lot further if they're coming from the south coast to actually get to the distribution centre. Just have fewer vehicles actually coming into Oxford Street and Regent Street. So I'd be interested more about how that's working. And thanks.
So, thank you for that. Are you really also pointing to the fact that there's a risk as well as distance? I mean, for me, the risk analysis, if you only have one centre, then and you consolidate the centres, then surely that also creates risk. Anyway, I leave that to Rachel.
Chair, it depends where the congestion is on the M25. If we're moving on, the other thing was the report on public conceptions and freight blindness. I mean, frankly, I think it's inevitable that when you've got time interval service of passenger trains running on the same hour on the clock, logically, you try and fit the freight services around that. But of course, the big difference is the difference in speeds. So unless you're going to get freight trains running at 100 miles an hour as well as the passenger trains, that's always going to be a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. I'll take the Regent Street comment away and we'll come back with a bit more detail on that one. And yes, thank you for your comments on the rail freight blindness piece. I think what was really interesting about this piece of research is when we engaged with our panel, we found that actually people were open to the preference, open to the idea and the concept of rail freight, even if it did impact on the provision of passenger services. And that was once we shared more information about sort of why rail freight's important, what the benefits of it are, and what it can deliver. So we were genuinely pleasantly surprised when we saw the results of that, and the fact that people were open to a discussion about whether or not rail freight or passenger services should take precedence, and how do you balance that, how do you get that right? Because we were expecting passenger services to be everybody's preference, but actually when we explained why rail freight was important, we did see, as you can see from the results there, that actually people were open to seeing more rail freight on their lines.
It was, I mean, it's going back to what Councillor Fletcher said, because one of the arguments for shifting the Trafford Park rail Freightliner terminal, not the other company, but the Freightliner terminal, is that it stops Freightliner trains going through Oxford Road and stopping the job, because if one of them stops in Oxford Road, it's blocking all the way back to Deansgate. But the trouble is, wherever you put them, there's pressure on the railway, you know, for capacity. And I'm not persuaded by that argument, because it's 3 or 4 trains during the day and the rest of it in the night when the passenger trains aren't a problem. So I'm not quite persuaded by how important that will be to actually solve Manchester's congestion problems.
Excuse Rod, I've got Councillor Perry's been very, very patient. She's sending me dirty looks now, so please.
Yes. So I'm assuming I don't need to repeat what I've just said. So I was very interested in the survey results, the Northern Public, and like you, I was very heartened by the preference for freight transport, or at least the acceptance of freight transport, and I assume that's because of a lot of people, a lot of these northern voices actually travel by road quite a lot and want, while they don't want heavy goods vehicles on the roads. And I think that is the big issue, getting freight off the roads rather than necessarily getting it onto the railway. So there might be also a case for freight reduction as well as getting it onto the railways. I had some questions. The Northern Voices is really interesting. Who are these people? Are they self-selected? Do we select them? Do we try to get a proper cross-section of the public of the North, or how does that work? So that's my first question. And then my second question is about Northern Ports. We had a presentation from the manager of Workington Port recently on Cumberland Council, and he is firmly of the opinion that on the west coast in the north, Workington is the only one that has capacity for expansion, and obviously it's also very close to the railway. So I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say about that.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of Northern Transport Voices, this is a panel of around about 2,000 residents from across the north. We recruit people, it's basically self-select, and we do recruit people. We do try and make sure that it's a balance and cross-section from across the north, but sometimes we do end up with sort of a little bit of a sort of there's probably sort of a little bit of a weighting to certain geographical areas, but we do open it up to people from across the north. We advertise through our social media to attract people to join that panel, as well as using our market research firm to recruit people as well. But when we do go out to recruit people from our panel, we look to work with members of your communications teams as well, so that we can sort of make sure that it does go far and wide. In terms of how that panel works. We can run focus groups with them, or we can just do surveys, and we've used them for things like transport-related social exclusion to develop our understanding of that, but also, for example, when there was the consultation on the closure of ticket offices in stations, we did some quick work with that panel, and that was so useful in terms of being able to inform our response to the consultation. So it's a really, really useful panel, and what you're seeing now is just a snapshot of how we work with them. In terms of the piece about working in port, yes, we have been working with your team on this, and we're engaging with them closely. We really want to make sure that we are getting a cross-section of ports from across the north involved in our work, and looking to see, you'll see in the Northern Ports piece, when we bring it back to you, that one of our big focuses at the minute is how do we increase capacity, and how do we make use of the increased capacity in Northern Ports? So how do you make the case for Northern freight into Northern Ports? That's an argument that we want to help make, and we need to work with your officers to do that. And we were just on a call yesterday with our exec board, and working in port was mentioned there as an example of how we should be doing that. So we're very much tapped into that work.
Excellent. Glad to reinforce the message then.
And if it helps, Councillor, as well, our chair, Lord McLaughlin, was with your leader earlier in the year and had a tour of the port, so it's very firmly in his mind too.
Thank you. Councillor Firth's been waiting patiently, just as Councillor Perry was waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It's a huge piece of work here, and I'm sure we all appreciate the efforts you put into it. Can I just mention, first of all, you touched on the upgrade from Leeds to Manchester and the closure of Huddersfield. By the way, that ends on the year is 2029, so it's a lot of disruption and a lot of work to go ahead. And that's the first part. Then there's the other part that goes over the hill, which I think will be 33. It's a massive project, but I do know the bridges are being lifted in anticipation of getting more freight on the railways. Can I also mention, Rachel, I do like the phrase freight blindness. Yeah, it's very clever, but it catches people's imagination. You've touched on Northern Ports. Is there a list of Northern Ports that do take a lot of freight or anticipate expansion?
There is, I haven't got the list in front of me now. It's included in our freight and logistics strategy, and it's also in our strategic transport plan. What I can do is I can make sure that we get that extract across to you after the meeting.
Can I come back to you? Because I think automatically you think of Liverpool, don't you? And the Humberside port, and then Newcastle, and then what's the others? Is it a huge list?
There's varying sizes of ports across the north, and what we've been doing is trying to engage with as many of them as we possibly can. So you've mentioned Liverpool, you've mentioned Humberside, there's Teesside, there's Port of Tyne. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. There's Workington Port, which I can't not mention.
You've got some of the smaller private ports, like you've got places like Fleetwood, for example, on the Lancashire coast, and Heysham. So there are a number that are in private ownership as well. Yeah. So we've a lot of the emphasis from our strategic transport plan is about the major ports. So we, in terms of thinking of those strategic connections, because a lot of the dealings with some of the smaller ports would be within your own authorities. But we can, as Rachel said, that list is there. You'll be surprised how many ports there are UK-wide, particularly when you add in some of the old sink ports and things like that as well. Yes, we are a seafaring nation.
I'm sorry, it's turned into a conversation, Chair. I do apologise, but I'm surprised at how many ports and the smaller ports that can actually take freight in and expand their freight business. It'd be very interesting.
Thank you. I'm going to leave about another 10 minutes on this particular item. So, just so that if people can keep their questions sharp, that would be really helpful. Just before I bring in the next person on my list, which will be Councillor O'Connor, One of the things that I'd just like to comment on here, and I think it picks up on that, is, and although it might not have been necessarily in these papers, I think we actually probably have to have a picture of what the size of the prize is here, how much freight is there actually here, what economic gross value added it brings in, and therefore we actually have a perspective on what we're looking at. I think you need that sort of northern perspective, and then maybe as a percentage of the whole country and what that opportunity is. I think it's all about, because we will only get the investment if we actually say what's the size of the prize. And I won't copyright that. If you want to use size of the prize, I'm hoping it goes with your freight blindness. Well, but we've got freight blindness, so and then the other thing I think that's critical is that in any paper there's a question that says, and although it's been referred to as interventions, I think it's about capability and capacity. Capability being people, capacity being sort of whether it's the gauge, the train height, the tunnel height, etc. So I'd just like to bring those in. And as I've got the floor, freight blindness has come back, and I'd just like to mention that one of the things where I think we are blind is the drivers. I think the well-being and the welfare of drivers, male or female, is not good. And I actually work with a couple of haulage people and drivers, and the standard of facilities, if they have to stay out overnight, and the cost of those facilities can be quite prohibitive. And the ability to maybe downsize or pass a shipment on in lay-bys and places for them to sleep overnight if they've got to, because we've put all these rules in about tachometers and taking breaks at certain time. But we really need to address this as well. Because if there's, in 10 years' time, they might all be self-driven, but in the short term, they're not going to be. So I really would like, I don't need an answer from this, but I would like you to take something away that says we need to address people because they're important. So I will now move it on, and it's Councillor Connor. Thank you.
Thanks. It's just a quick one. Just to go back to Councillor Fletcher and talking about the removal of Trafford Park over towards the Warrington end, which is a small park side, I believe. And that was by and large because the port, which is referred to as the port of Liverpool. So it's around this, the timescale for the timescale of the decision for this, along with because I was under the impression that somebody had already made the decision. So if you're saying there's not a decision, when will the decision be made?
I think we need to take that one offline because it's a matter being directly involved with the local authorities around that area. It's not something we are specifically briefed on in terms of where things are in that regard.
Okay.
I've got Councillor Fletcher next.
Well, just briefly, Chair, yes, talking about passenger services, I think I should mention in view of what's been said that like people in the Knutsford and Obley area of Cheshire East, and likewise people in the Prestbury, Poynton areas of Cheshire East, commuters there, they keep asking for more services, local services into Manchester, and the response they keep getting back is there's no capacity for extra services. I'm just throwing that in because of what's been said, that some of these people, they might get extremely annoyed if suddenly they find, instead of having an hourly service, they've got a 2-hourly service, which I can understand, making room for freight, but the capacity into Manchester from South Manchester suburbs, there's just no spare capacity at all.
Okay, Rachel, if you could just note that one, and Councillor Connell, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I will not have the views on this on freight on rails. Obviously a good idea, but there is this tension between increased capacity for freight and passenger services. That's always going to be there until technology allows more movements on rail than is currently the case, and that's to do with safety technology signalling, but you don't want to hear that from me, blah, blah, blah. It's simply that attached to this, there's a colourful document about consolidation centres, which I dutifully read, and I wonder if a word is going to be said about them before we move on, because they are part of this agenda item.
Came late. We've done it.
We have actually done quite a comprehensive talk on consolidation centres before you arrived.
Gosh, I was only 10 minutes late. Okay, right. So, okay, fine. If they've been dealt with already, that's not a problem.
Is there any particular, do you have any particular?
No. I just wanted to know whether they were going to be covered, but you tell me they have been. Right.
Yeah, in particular, it was the concern about transshipment, the concerns about consolidation, and also the facilities.
It was a new concept to me, and it was interesting, but thanks.
Chair, thank you. If I could just come back on a couple of points, and in particular the ones that you raised. You mentioned about the size of the prize. In terms of the freight sector, we've estimated, our data shows that by 2050 it's going to be worth more than £30 billion in the north, and it's going to employ more than 500,000 people. So we're talking an incredible sector for the north. One of the things that we are looking at the minute is how we get more data from our partners in the ports, and how we understand sort of the value of what's coming into the north and what could come into the north. What is the potential for us? What would that extra capacity give us, and what would that do in terms of the economic benefit that it brings? So that's something that we're looking at. Thank you about the very nice comments on the freight blindness piece. I cannot claim credit for that piece of work. That's come from my fantastic team. In terms of the lorry parking, we're working closely with National Highways to look at lorry parking facilities on the strategic roads network. And then in terms of the final point there, just about in terms of capacity for extra services, what we're trying to do with this piece of research is just show that we need to get the balance right. We need to get the balance between passenger services and freight services, and this is just a piece of evidence that helps us to do that. So this isn't about us saying you need to prioritise freight services. This is about saying, look, here's a piece of evidence to help make the case for it. Thank you.
Councillor Parish.
It's a bit of a throwaway really, because one of the unexpected aspects of Brexit was that the Ireland to the EU traffic, where containers used to come in at Holyhead or Liverpool, and then were carried by road across to the eastern ports. There's a lot been diversion of direct sailings from Ireland to the EU.
Yeah.
And if some of those issues of extra costs and customs and things were sorted, would that be extra traffic coming back? The downside would be it might be more traffic coming back on the M62, the M6 and the A whatever it is to Felixstowe.
Are there any other questions, committee? No. Councillor Perth.
Chair, you raised a very interesting point about driver welfare, and I think something we haven't even touched on before, to my knowledge. I wonder if a lot of them, these drivers, because they're self-employed, for sure, but a lot aren't. And I just wondered whether the Transport Union, particularly, say, Unite, have done any work on this. And I think it would be more than useful to contact them to tell them that it has been raised as an issue with us, and whether they like to make any contribution.
I think Rachel can take this one, can you?
We haven't engaged with any of the unions on this piece of work, but what we have done is we have worked with the Road Haulage Association, the RHA, and they've done a considerable piece of work, and they have been using that to advocate for greater facilities. So I would imagine that they've probably done that, but we can take that away and look at it.
If you would, I think it would be useful.
Okay, thank you, committee. I'm going to close this item now. I think several key things have come out about how important freight is. It's obviously got a number of balance issues, but in essence, to summarise, I think it's how can it add to the economic development of the north? So the size of the prize. I think there's something very key around capacity and capability, and I think we need to understand. We need to not just understand. We don't just need a narrative. We actually need numbers. You can paint a story with numbers quite frequently. even if it's gauge heights and stuff and pictorial. So I think a lot of that needs to be picked up because it's very easy to miss that sort of detail. But thank you, committee, for raising that. Then the other thing that I think is important, because some of the issues here actually relate to other things that are in our own councils, and you'll probably note that when I first started doing this in 2017, I think there were 18 councillors around the table. You seem to have reduced somewhat. And that's, it's consolidation, it's combined authorities, etc. But one of the things I think perhaps we should consider is that there's two fine reports here, and I think that possibly you need to pass those both to your planning committee, but where planning permission issues might come in, but also the executive member for transport, on maybe if you're representing 2 or 3 councils. So for example, I'm here on behalf of York as well as North Yorkshire, and I will make sure that these papers are sent to them just so that it gets them thinking, because I think they're absolutely excellent. And if you have transport scrutiny committees within your area as well. So with that, I'd like to move to our next item. Thank you very much, Rachel. And Rachel, you're on again. It's spending review outcome, major road network.
Thank you, Chair. It is me again on this one. And the purpose of this report is to provide an update on some of the recent funding announcements around investment in road schemes that came out of the spending review, but also to share a bit of an update on some of the engagement that we're currently undertaking with our constituent authorities around major road network and large local major schemes. So what I did want to highlight is in the spending review, it was announced that there was £24 billion for road improvement and maintenance, which was going to be distributed between the strategic road network and funding for roads that were managed by local highway authorities. We were really pleased to see in the spending review that there were two key funding announcements for the North, one of which was the dualling of the A66 from A1 Scotch Corner to Penrith, which at TFN we've been working very closely with National Highways. We provided a considerable amount of information for the business case on that, so we were absolutely delighted to see that approved. And the other one which came out was improvements at Simster Island around the M60, M62 and M66. We identified both of those schemes in our submission to the spending review, and we consider them both to be of pan-regional significance. We are, well actually we had the draft RIS report published last week. You'll see in your report it says it was expected shortly. It was actually published last week just after these papers came out, and we're waiting on the final version to be published in March 2026. So we are continuing to make the case for a number of other key schemes of pan-regional significance that we think should be included in RIS 3. Take for example the improvements on the A19 north of Newcastle. That's the one that we're really pushing for at the minute. The other announcement which came out at the same time as spending review that we were delighted to see included was Middlewich Eastern Bypass. That's a large local major scheme, and we've worked really closely with Cheshire East Council officers to help improve and work on the full business case that was submitted to the Department for Transport. So that was another key announcement that we saw in spending review. That moves me on to the wider major roads network and large local major programme. We got a letter from the Department for Transport that said that there would be a review of the 42 schemes across England that are still within that MRN and LLM programme. And in the North, that translates to 22 schemes which are currently under review. All constituent authorities and highways authorities have been asked to complete a pro forma for submission to the Department for Transport, and the deadline is tomorrow. Next Friday. We are working very closely with officers from all of your authorities at the minute, anybody who has one of those schemes, to help support them with the completion of that pro forma through what we call our TFN office. So that's about us providing evidence and information to help make the case for those schemes, but also if there's anything that we can do to look at business cases or review those pro formas before they are submitted. So you'll see section 4 of the report details the process and the review that's underway at the minute by DFT. Once those pro formas are submitted, DFT intend to meet with each of the authorities individually, and that's something that we will continue to offer support on. There's nothing further that I wanted to highlight in the report, Chair, apart from to say that Appendix 1 is the list of all of those schemes which are currently under review within the MRN.
Committee, Councillor Parrish.
I'll start by being a bit parochial. I see the Warrington Western Link is on there. What is missing from all these is how much they're each going to cost. Because I think the original budget for that link, which is only about 5 miles, but it does mean you've got to get under the West Coast Main Line through 2 old bridges, one of which is below high tide level on the Mersey, and then over the Mersey itself, further up. And the original budget was about £140 million, of which the government was going to stump up 70 million. But the latest, and it's probably gone up now, but last figure I heard was 210 million, of which the government was still only offering 70 million. So I think for each of these schemes, to actually know how much they're going to cost might be interesting. I'm not sure how useful it will be, but it might be interesting.
Thank you, Councillor. We are working with the authorities. We do have that information. We haven't included it in a public report while it's still being while all the performers are still being completed. But what we do know is that the overall budget from the department is not sufficient to fund all of those schemes, which is why we need to work really closely to make a strong case when we're completing those performers. And that's what we're working to help with and provide as much data and evidence as we can to support that process.
Thank you. Councillor Connell, please.
Yeah, I should offer an apology for having fired off an email for not having not carefully enough read the documents. I didn't see the A66 in Appendix 1. I thought, what's the A66 done wrong? But then I see it's actually at the beginning of the document in 3.2. So I will say nothing further. Thank you very much for mentioning it immediately. And my apologies for not noticing that clause.
It's quite a lengthy set of papers. So, your apologies, I'm sure, are gratefully received. I've got Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. I note in paragraph 4.7 of the report the reference to the Minister's letter from the 8th of July. Says there's going to be a requirement of minimum 50% local contribution and requirement to cover any cost increases arising from inflationary pressures. I mean, I take that as being just what it's going to have to be, whether I like it or not. But I just wonder how forcefully we're making the case that if that is the expectation that they're setting, that we are saying to DFT that they need to get the finger out and deal with the length of time it can take to get through some of these business cases and the approval processes. Because if we're going to have to absorb cost increases because we've had to sit and wait for them to figure things out, that seems ever so slightly unbalanced, shall we say.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. We did query that, and we have had confirmation from DFT that that is what they are expecting before we included it in the paper. In terms of the sort of feedback that we're giving to DFT, we know that there's a number of these schemes that have been in the process for some time. We are saying that once we've completed this review, we will need to see decisions made rapidly so that authorities can progress.
If I may, Chair, just say, I think that would be very helpful, because I just think, I understand there isn't a tremendous amount of money. I understand that there's never going to be a pot of money that will cover everything that everybody wants to do. But if we're going to have to soak up inflationary pressures at a local or regional level, then DFT really needs to work with us to work through these things, for so long as we're going to have to keep going back cap in hand to them for the approval for the majority of the funding. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Parrish.
Again, go back to a particular issue, but it's typical of elsewhere. You get the opposition comes from people who are saying this is just a bypass, it'll just increase traffic, and then the real reason is not to ease congestion, it's to open up development land. It'll just put more cars on the road. But that raises a particular issue in that the business case often relies on the land being opened up for development and the value that's gained from that. but there don't seem to be any mechanism by which the people actually then develop the land and build the houses and sell them actually contribute to the facilities which have been provided to enable them to make profit.
Thank you, Councillor. That does relate very closely to local planning issues, so I will note it and take it away. Thank you.
Can I just sort of pick up on both yourself, Councillor Parish, and Councillor Ferguson? I think what we've put in the report is some of those hooks that I think the main board would want to pick up in pursuit of reflecting on the spending review, because you're absolutely right. Whilst it's important to have the right level of assurance that it is the right scheme, it needs to be done in a timely way and it needs to be going through process. And I think there's enough evidence to suggest it can take 2 or 3 years to go through this. And one of the things I've asked the team to try and get a handle on is just the scale of the consequential cost, in both in terms of financial cost, but also delay in development coming forward as a consequence of this, because there needs to be a balance. You need to have the right level of assurance, but you need to get on and realise the benefits as quickly as possible. So that is an area where I think, given that the Treasury has consistently been wanting to look at how can the Green Book be applied more appropriately, because there is some flexibility in the Green Book, but how can it be applied more regularly? And that's part of the reason why we did the Northern Appraisal Playbook, to help with that. And it kind of links to your point, Councillor Parish, about how, and the one that sticks out for me there is Shalesmoor Gateway, where the kind of relationship that Rachel's been talking about, where you look at how does it relate to planned development, how can you time the development and the delivery of the infrastructure to allow that. That's all implicit, and well, actually it's explicit, not implicit, it's explicit within the business case. And yet some of that is having to be gone round again in terms of assessment. Now, my point to Councillor Ferguson, it has to be the right level of assurance, but when you get you have to start questioning when the scale of the work to look at the assurance starts to become a significant figure for the actual scheme cost. You have to start saying, have we got the balance quite right? And I think that is one area where, moving forward with the focus on the appraisal process, which we've been working on, can start to provide some evidence to challenge the status quo and the way we've done it in the past.
Thank you. Any more questions, committee? In which case, I'll just, I think you've got some valid comments there, I hope, Rachel, to take away. But it looks like the key things I've picked up is assurance of what the schemes will release. Speed of delivery is important within that, but also within it is the decision-making appraisal process, and how much that impacts on the other two parts. So hopefully that will be something you can take away. One example, if should anybody get the opportunity to drive around the east side of Leeds, they've done some interesting work with the infrastructure prior to building. So actually they've actually put the roads in and presumably the drainage before they start building. And it's it's certainly very different to just up the road in Harrogate. So, and they've done a great job. So if you are driving that way, it's worth a look. Thank you. I'm now going to move us to, and it's now you, Martin, I'm afraid, the quarterly operating report, please.
Thank you, Chair, and colleagues, members. This is usually just for your information and awareness, and for noting. Although there are particular points you want to pick up, I'm more than happy to do so. I think, Chair, what I wanted to kind of say, if you looked at the quarterly operating report, which also goes to the main board on a quarterly basis as well, and it also is published as well for visibility. It's a way of kind of us demonstrating progress against the agreed business plan. And if you were to look at the detail in the quarterly operating report this year compared with last year, you'll see it's much more detailed. There's much more, it's much more focus on actually delivering or implementing the policies that were set out in the strategic transport plan last year. A couple of things I would highlight. and Chair, it kind of leads on from the previous conversation. In the introduction, you'll see we make reference to that work we've been doing. Rachel and her team have been leading, not just in terms of the Northern Appraisal Playbook, but also a conversation that was had with Treasury officials as part of the Green Book, where we used examples like the A19 roads in the North East, we used the Middlewich Bypass, we used Bradford's Station. Examples of where investment in infrastructure is actually quite transformative. And therefore you are starting to get some of those things, Councillor Parish, that you were talking about, where you get the benefit of the development and the impact not just for the development itself, but for the surrounding area. And we see plenty of opportunities, plenty of examples across the country where that happens. And it's using these examples to demonstrate how the circumstances in the north need to be better reflected in the appraisal and feed into the work. So it was a really good conversation that we've had today, and it's an ongoing conversation as well. One where the Treasury officials are really keen to understand practical examples and then work with us and partners to understand how we can maybe realise some of that. So that's the first thing I would highlight. The second point I would highlight, Chair, because I know that this is something you've raised at a previous meeting when we've talked about the TFN offer, and I think you've said to us that it'd be great to get out there and actually highlight and show it off a little bit more. And again, Rachel and our team have been doing this in what we call showcases, going out to individual authorities and actually taking some of their officers through what's available, what's available. It's kind of the thing. Once you know what's there, you're going to use it, and we're seeing an uptake where we have that time spent. We're seeing an uptake in terms of people using it to the extent now. I think we're probably, if you look at the saving to the public sector of using data that's already available, tools that have already been produced, rather than going out and commissioning it 14 times, doing it once and using it a number of times, I think we're probably up to around about £1 million we've saved collectively to the public sector. And of course, because it's there, you can make use of it much more quickly. So I think just responding to, I think, as I said, I know something you've raised as a committee before, Chair, about just telling people about it, and the more you tell about it, the more it becomes used, and that's very much the case. And the third and final thing by way of introduction is to say, as part of that TFN offer, quite a bit of work is being done at the moment to going back to almost where we started the conversation about the data, the information, the tools, the frameworks that we've got in relation to new rail scheme and new rail investment, and trying to make that much more accessible as well to partners as we move forward. So that's something that will come online during the course of the autumn. So that's kind of three quick highlights, but if there were any questions, Chair, from the committee about the report as a whole, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any questions? Oh, Councillor Perry.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions on things which were coming up when the report was written, but should have happened by now. So 5.2, Rail North considered this on the 1st of September. So it was the accessibility thing. Do we have an answer?
Might I look to colleague Katie to answer that?
We had an extensive conversation about accessibility at the Rail North Committee, which was on Monday this week. We've had a response from the Secretary of State acknowledging that there is a long way to go on rail station accessibility here in the north of England. But I think the committee felt disappointed that that things weren't able to move quicker. And also that there was the response was that the Access for All funding, which is one of the primary modes of funding at the moment, is still managed centrally. And I think certainly some of the mayors that we had on the call on Monday were very much of a view that actually perhaps goes against devolution policy more generally. So we are in the process that the committee have asked us to write back again to the Secretary of State and offer to work with the department about how you might do this. And one of the things we also flagged is that while MCAs, current ones, new ones emerging, are in a position to potentially fund some station works themselves, that's only if they're able to do so, and not all MCAs, particularly the newer ones, have necessarily got all the flexibilities. So I'm hoping that we will be able to get that letter issued in the very near future.
Thank you. And my other question was about the draft report on research on transport users' attitudes to road safety and speed management, which is due for publication sometime between July and September. Do we have anything more specific?
Thank you, Councillor. This is another report which has been completed through our Northern Transport Voices panel. We have the draft report now. It's just gone through our internal sign-offs. We're hoping that it will be published this month.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure it's quite, you could call it quite an omission, but on page 6, long-term strategy, it just says infrastructure requirements beyond HS2 phase 1, and I'm wondering what that incorporates, because obviously we wait announcements on what's now become the Liverpool and Manchester Railway and other aspects of what was Northern Powerhouse Rail. I'm going to presume you're not party to any Treasury best value examination of the schemes, but obviously the key thing there is a tunnel under South Manchester, which frankly would really only be viable if it's connecting up to HS2 as well as serving the new Liverpool and Manchester plans.
So I haven't got any trade secrets to share, Councillor, I promise. I think there's recognition by the industry that actually the removal of HS2 phases 2AB fundamentally changed some of the long-term planning assumptions. So we are working with the industry on what those new long-term planning assumptions may need to look like, think about. And we're doing that because, and there's a whole host of partners involved, but because as Transport for the North, us have all agreed our strategic transport plan, which does set the long-term ambition for the next 25 years and is an important indicator therefore about what outputs we may need from our rail network over that period. So that's work that we're doing at the moment, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to say a little bit more about it when we get to the Rail North Committee in November.
It's a different topic, Chair. So.
Carry on.
Okay. It was just an aside, really, because Councillor Fletcher mentioned about the, about the people wanting services into Manchester from Cheshire. I mean, under devolution, we're likely to get a combined authority with Cheshire and Warrington, the two Cheshire authorities and Warrington. And obviously, part of the devolution thing might be control. The mayor might get control over rail services in their area. But frankly, a Cheshire authority trying to tell Liverpool and Manchester what to do does not seem a realistic what powers have you got? Because you're just one line going into two huge conurbations. So I just thought to throw that in there.
I'm sure, Councillor, you don't expect me to comment on the politics, but what I can say from a stakeholder perspective, that our colleagues in Greater Manchester and Liverpool City region, with Warrington and with the Cheshire, we work very closely together because it is one rail line and it is about connecting our great towns and cities. So we work very closely. I see that in the Rail North Committee, in the TFM board, and the work we do with officers. So if that goes any way to reassuring you.
So just before I bring Councillor Fletcher, one of the things I think is HS2 may have changed the planning assumptions, but I actually think, for example, this new government has changed the build requirement. So, for example, in North Yorkshire, instead of building 20,000 houses over the next 15 years, it's now having to build 60,000. So that's a huge change, and I think that might be something that needs to be thrown into your assumptions somewhere, because that's clearly moved the goalpost there. And I'm sure North Yorkshire's not the only place. We haven't picked up all 1.5 million houses that we're trying to build as a country over the next 5 years, but we've taken our share, so that might well change things as well. Anyway, Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, Chair, just going over what you said, I wasn't going to just mention it, but it's a very important point what you just said, because in Cheshire East we had over 8 years building supply of land, and with government policy it's now less than 4, which basically means the developers can build wherever they want, and a lot of the green belt is becoming grey belt apparently, so that's one of the concerns. But what I was going to talk on, going on from what Councillor Parry said, was I believe recently an announcement was made somewhere in Westminster that the Liverpool-Manchester part of HS3, whatever you call it, will definitely be going ahead, which is good news. I also read that we're going to continue, again, try and extend Manchester Airport Station, which has been extended a few times, has been a dead end, is an absolute disaster. Well, of course, the Liverpool-Manchester part of HS3 includes a Manchester Airport Station. So basically, are we, has the government been any more forthcoming apart from saying, yes, we're going to do it? Do we have any more information on that? Because that could affect whether or not we need to extend the current Manchester Airport Station, couldn't it?
So, Councillor, we have not yet seen or had an announcement from the government about Northern Powerhouse Rail, which would include anything around Liverpool-Manchester. Indeed, the TfN Preferred Network thinks about going from Liverpool to Manchester to Leeds, across to York, up to Northallerton, Newcastle, Leamside Line, etc. So we're awaiting something on that, and again, the Rail North Committee reflected that on Monday. I think it's worth just mentioning that the works you refer to on the airport current station have already been in the plan for some time, acknowledging the need to bring in some of the longer trains. So that was already baked in terms of infrastructure investment over the next 10 years.
Any other questions, committee? Looks like you got off lightly, Martin. Okay, so with that, I'm going to let everybody know the date of the next meeting, which will be on Thursday, the 20th of November. It'll be 11 o'clock. It will be online. And now I need to bring the public element of this meeting to an end, but I believe I probably have to have one of these able people at the side of me to make an announcement as to why item 10 is excludes the public.
So, to resolve that the public and the press be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of this, as it involves likely disclosure of exempt information, set out in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So can we just have, are all members happy with us taking this item in private?
Are you okay? Thank you.